Under the burning sun of the Egyptian desert, in the year 1898, a group of dusty archaeologists stood before a half-buried mound of limestone, staring into the mouth of time. Their leader, a mild-mannered Frenchman named Victor Loret, believed that within this unassuming patch of sand lay something forgotten by history. What none of them knew was that they were standing above the tomb of a man who had once been worshipped as a living god, then erased from memory so thoroughly that no one had spoken his name for over 3,000 years. This is the story of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, the dreamer who tried to reshape Egypt's world, the man who built a city for the sun. His time on earth lasted barely 17 years, yet his vision flickered across eternity, whispering through the centuries of stone until its rediscovery shocked the modern world. Long before anyone uttered the name Akhenaten again, Egypt was the land of 1,000 gods. From the humble fishing villages along the Nile Delta to the sacred precincts of Karnak and Thebes, divine presence was everywhere. The gods lived in the stones, the animals, the golden statues, and in the breath of the wind that carried life to the crops. The most majestic of these divine powers was Amun, lord of Thebes, whose priests commanded wealth and influence rivaling the pharaohs themselves. By the time Amenhotep III ascended the throne around 1390 BCE, Egypt glittered at the height of power: gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, horses from Mitanni. All flowed into the royal treasuries. The pharaoh was a sun in human form, dazzling in his splendor. Amenhotep III's reign lasted nearly 4 decades, and his son, a frail young prince once known as Amenhotep IV, grew up in a world that seemed perfect. Yet as he matured, something troubled him deeply. The lavish rituals of Amun's temple, the dizzying processions and sacrifices, the endless offerings to a pantheon of invisible deities. He began to feel that the truth of the divine was buried beneath layers of ceremony. His eyes turned not to the dark sanctuaries of Thebes, but to the blinding brilliance of the open sky. There, in the radiant disk of the sun, he felt the presence of something purer, simpler, more complete. This sun, not as a god in human form but as the raw energy of creation itself, was what he began to call the Aten. When Amenhotep IV inherited the throne, perhaps around the age of 20, he was already a man apart. In the early days of his reign, he played the dutiful monarch, appearing in festivals, presiding over ceremonies. But within a few short years, a transformation occurred that would shake the foundations of Egypt. In a bold move that stunned the priests of Amun and unsettled the conservative classes, the young pharaoh declared a new faith. He proclaimed that the Aten, the radiant disk of the sun, was the supreme and perhaps the only true god. The others, long revered since time immemorial, were merely reflections, shadows. For the first time in history, in one of the most polytheistic cultures on earth, a pharaoh pointed toward what sounded astonishingly like monotheism. He changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. But his revolution was not confined to temples and prayers. It was architectural, social, and even artistic. Determined to break from the past, he left Thebes entirely, forsaking the ancient capital steeped in the cult of Amun. On a stretch of virgin desert between the traditional cities of Memphis and Thebes, he ordered the construction of a new city, Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. There, he imagined a radiant utopia bathed in sunlight, a living temple to the god of the sky. Within a few years, an entire metropolis blossomed in the sand. Streets were laid out with mathematical precision. Palaces adorned with murals of flowers and birds glowed in vibrant color. Great temples rose open to the sky, their altars directly exposed to the sun. Here, worship was not confined to shadowed halls. Priests and commoners alike could stand beneath the sheer brilliance of the Aten, arms raised, faces illuminated. In Akhenaten city, the sun itself was the roof of the temple. But even more astonishing was the art that bloomed during this time. In a culture renowned for its rigid conventions and stylized depictions of kingship, Akhenaten's sculptors and painters embraced an eerie naturalism. The pharaoh was shown with elongated limbs, narrow shoulders, and broad hips, features that appeared almost androgynous. The royal family was portrayed in moments of tenderness. The king kissing his daughters, the queen sitting beside him in equal stature, the rays of the Aten touching them all. For perhaps the first time, the divine and the human met in domestic intimacy. Historians have long debated whether Akhenaten's strange appearance in these images reflected a real physical condition or was symbolic, a visual language expressing spiritual transformation. Whatever the case, it was clear that Akhenaten wanted to shatter more than one tradition. He wanted to redefine what it meant to be divine. Yet revolutions, even those bathed in sunlight, cast long shadows. The priests of Amun, stripped of their power and revenues, seethed with resentment. The people of Egypt, accustomed to 1,000 gods watching over every field, feared that the new ways offended the heavens. Still, Akhenaten pressed forward, exalting the Aten in hymns of luminous poetry. These hymns, preserved on the walls of Amarna, celebrate the sun disk as the heartbeat of creation. When the Aten rises, life awakens. When it sets, the world sleeps or dies. This vision, both simple and profound, resonated with the cyclic rhythm of the Nile, the great artery of Egypt's soul. In the heart of the city, surrounded by courtiers and faithful artists, Akhenaten ruled in the light of his god, and for a time, all seemed radiant. His queen Nefertiti stood beside him as near equal, her image immortalized with the same grace and vitality that continues to fascinate the modern world. Together, they ruled a court unlike any Egypt had ever seen. Poetic, philosophical, intoxicated with the conviction of being touched by truth. But beyond the walls of Akhenaten, the empire trembled. Wealth that once poured into Thebes slowed to a trickle. Foreign vassals in Canaan and Syria begged for aid against rebellious enemies, their pleas carved into clay tablets that still bear witness to a time of neglect. Akhenaten, absorbed in his spiritual vision, seemed deaf to these cries. To some, he had abandoned not only the old gods but the very duties of kingship. The years passed, and the golden city by the Nile shone on. Then, gradually, darkness began to gather. The exact cause of Akhenaten's death remains uncertain. Some believe he succumbed to illness. Others whisper of intrigue. What is known is that shortly after his disappearance from the world, his luminous capital began to fade. Courtiers who once lauded the Akhenaten now scrambled to restore the old order. The name and image of the heretic pharaoh were chiseled from walls, his city abandoned to the desert. His successor, a boy king who would become famous centuries later as Tutankhamun, returned to Thebes and reinstated the worship of Amun. In an ironic twist, this young pharaoh, possibly Akhenaten's own son, became the glittering symbol of Egypt's ancient faith reborn. For over 3,000 years, the desert sand swallowed Akhenaten whole. The palaces, paintings, and altars of the Aten disappeared beneath shifting dunes, and the name Akhenaten vanished from the king lists. Pharaohs after him declared a complete damnatio memoriae, an erasure from history so thorough it was as if he had never lived. When European explorers arrived in Egypt in the 19th century, they knew nothing of the heretic who had built a city to the sun. The rediscovery of Akhenaten was one of archaeology's most dramatic moments. In the 1880s, locals near the village of El Amarna began finding inscribed tablets in the soil, diplomatic correspondence between Egypt and its allies. These Amarna letters opened a window into the tumultuous age of Akhenaten. A few years later, excavations revealed the foundations of temples and palaces, their walls still faintly bearing the shape of a radiant sun disk. It was as though a ghost civilization had spoken from the void. Scholars were astonished. Who was this pharaoh who praised only a single god? How had such a figure existed in the most polytheistic culture known to antiquity? For some early Egyptologists, Akhenaten was a prophetic visionary, a herald of monotheism before his time. Others saw him as a fanatic, a dreamer whose obsession nearly destroyed his empire. Even Sigmund Freud, fascinated by the mystery, speculated that Moses might have been influenced by the Aten faith. The idea, though now discounted by historians, testifies to how profoundly Akhenaten's ghost unsettled the modern imagination. Yet beyond the speculation, the truth that emerges is both more human and more tragic. Akhenaten's revolution was not only a theological one, it was personal. He sought connection with the divine not through ritual, but through direct experience. His art, his poetry, his city, these were attempts to bring heaven and earth together in light. In one of his hymns to the Aten, he describes the sun as the creator of all peoples, making no distinction between Egypt and foreign lands, speaking of nature's unity in a voice almost modern in tone. For a fleeting moment in the New Kingdom's long story, Egypt glimpsed a kind of universalism that transcended borders and faiths. But revolutions that spring from vision often falter against the weight of tradition. When Akhenaten outlawed the old gods, he attacked the institutions that sustained the economic and spiritual life of his kingdom. The temples of Amun had for centuries employed thousands, priests, artisans, farmers. Their wealth funded not only religion but trade, irrigation, and cultural stability. By stripping them of their power, Akhenaten undermined the structure that held his realm together. His new temples, though beautiful, could not replace that network overnight. Nor could a single god, however radiant, serve the emotional needs of a people raised in a landscape of countless divine faces. The city of Akhenaten, as seen through the ruins today, remains perhaps the most intimate window into the life of an ancient pharaoh. Unlike the timeless monuments of Giza or the austere tombs of the Valley of the Kings, Amun shows us a living city, a place where people cooked, played music, and painted their walls with scenes of ordinary joy. Archaeologists have found workmen's villages, bakeries, schools, and workshops filled with half-finished sculptures of the royal family. It was a capital not of gods distant in temples, but of human beings basking beneath the sun. And yet, from the very beginning, the specter of impermanence hung over it. The tombs carved for Akhenaten's officials make frequent mention of change and renewal, as though everyone sensed that this golden moment could not last. A poem found in one tomb speaks of the horizon growing dark, the Aten withdrawing behind the mountains. Whether they meant this literally or as metaphor, the words foreshadow the city's fate. Within a few years of Akhenaten's death, it was deserted. The once radiant temples stood silent under the pitiless sun they had worshipped, their altars gathering dust. Centuries passed. Sand covered the reliefs of the pharaoh's strange face. Wind and time erased the paint from his walls. Even his magnificent statues, carved with loving detail, were broken and scattered across the desert. But ideas are resilient things, and though his name was forgotten, traces of his revolution lingered like echoes. In the modern world, Akhenaten's rediscovery came at a time when humanity was itself rethinking faith, art, and individuality. Romantic poets and freethinkers saw in him a kindred spirit, a loner who defied convention in search of truth. Artists admired the sensual realism of Amarna sculpture. Philosophers marveled at the notion of a man who had dared to imagine a single creative force governing all life. To some, he became a symbol of visionary genius undone by idealism. To others, he was a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris. Today, standing among the wind-carved ruins of Amarna, you can still trace the outlines of Akhenaten's dreams. The main street of the city stretches in a ghostly line toward the cliffs, where the tomb of the heretic rests. At sunrise, the light touches the stone just as he would have seen it thousands of years ago. First a glimmer, then a blaze, spilling across the desert floor. For a moment, it seems as if time folds back on itself, and the Aten rises again over his horizon. One can almost hear the hymns echoing faintly, praising the warmth that gives life to all. But the story of Akhenaten is not merely one of failure or oblivion. It also reminds us how fragile civilizations are, how easily one mind can alter the course of tradition, even if only for a heartbeat. In that brief interval, Egypt witnessed a philosophy of unity and light that would leave its faint imprint on the tapestry of world thought. His legacy, though nearly erased, resurfaces whenever humanity sees divinity not in the image of kings, but in the radiance that touches everyone equally. What then was Akhenaten's true nature? Visionary prophet, misguided zealot, or something more complex? A poet of the divine whose idealism outpaced his world? The answer may lie somewhere between. His reign reveals both the brilliance and the peril of radical thought, the courage to question the sacred, and the cost of doing so in an empire built on timeless gods. His sun god did not survive him, but his daring to look beyond the horizon became a testament to human imagination itself. Back in 1898, when Victor Loret brushed away the final layer of dust from a broken stele and saw a name strange to history, Akhenaten, He unknowingly resurrected the first forgotten dreamer of the ancient world. Through the scattered ruins of Amarna and the melodies of his hymns carved into stone, we can still sense the pulse of that dream, of a man who tried to bind heaven and earth by a thread of light. The sand has claimed his kingdom, but the horizon he sought, the eternal sunrise, remains.